is Joyce Pellino Crane, editor of the Westford Eagle and wickedlocalwestford.com. I am here today with our third selectman candidate, Don Siriani.
Hi,
Welcome, Don.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Don is running for one of two selectman seats in Westford. He is also joined by Jim Jarvie and incumbent Kelly Ross. This is the third in a three-part series of interviews we're doing with the candidates. And Don, I'd like to start right off with one big, broad question. Can you tell us what you think the overarching issues for Westford are currently?
I sure can, and thank you very much for letting me come and sit with you and to Westfordcat for arranging it. I've been traveling around Westford for the best part of my life, and in doing that, I've really observed and listened to people. As a candidate, of course, I've done that even more. And what I'm hearing that people are concerned about really is the character of the town of Westford, making sure that it stays a livable place. And of course, one of the things that people then talk about is making it an affordable place, not only to live, but an affordable place to govern. So people really do express a concern about the sustainability of our budget. We can't have these great departments, great schools, if we can't afford them. So people have asked me to really look carefully at where we spend our money to make sure they're getting not only the right services that they want, but a good value for them. And so what I've tried to do is study our budget and come up with some tools to allow citizens to understand the budget in whole new ways that they have before. But also people are talking about how to make Westford a place that is welcoming to new business. We have relied a great deal on the new growth at the Cornerstone. That's a sort of economic vitality point along Route 110. And people are telling me that they're also really concerned that for senior citizens, Westford has become a very challenging place to live. They love to be here, and we've certainly seen people who've lived in our town for generations, but it has become a very difficult place for them to afford to stay. So I have, I think, some plans that we can actually do to help people to stay and to continue to love Westford.
We'll get to those in a minute, but do you think there's a better way to budget for the town and a better way to handle the cost of running the town?
Well, I had the pleasure of sitting next to Ellen Hardy at the League of Women Voters debate, and I had such a great time hearing her talking about the value of town meeting, especially open town meeting. And to answer your question, that is a great place where any citizen, any resident, voter can come and actually participate in our budgeting process. So the more people we can engage and welcome, not only at town meeting, but to be a citizen volunteer on a board or a commission or a committee or in a nonprofit group, the better the community can be. And how that translates then into better budgeting is we have more people who become aware of how we spend our dollars. And to help them, I have put forward a plan that would create a website at no cost to us. We would populate the website with the data from our past budgets, and we would then allow people to enter their tax bill, and graphically, and I know you have a copy of it, graphically it would then represent on their computer screen where every dollar that they've paid in taxes is spent and distributed across each and every town department. That will give people a new way to connect with their tax dollars, and they could really see the value of where their money is showing up to affect them.
So let's just show this a little bit longer on camera if we can, because it may be hard to see at home, but what this is a rendering of is a mock homepage for residents, voters to go to online and click on boxes that would take them deeper into the budget numbers.
Exactly.
Correct?
And they can do that not just for this fiscal year, but they can go backwards in time and see how, for instance, special education costs is a great example of where we've seen changes in our costs. Now, if people want to actually see this work, they can go to the town of Arlington. They have a website, Visual Arlington Budget, and they can experiment with it. And Arlington created this, and they will allow Westford to use it for free using open source software. So there's no cost to us, and there's so much upside because we'll allow people to connect with the budget in a way they have never been able to before.
So some of the boxes you have here are, in addition to special education and pupil services, public works, fire, library, capital budget, pensions, insurance, operations, maintenance. I think this would be very interesting, and I think you said the town of Arlington. So for voters at home, if you're interested in seeing how this website would actually work, just search on Google for Town of Arlington, Massachusetts, and the town website will come up.
That's right. They call it their visual budget, and I call it the budget box, especially since the data is represented in boxes. The bigger the box, the more money is spent in there. And again, you can click and get to the level of detail that you as a voter, you as a taxpayer are interested in. And what I like about this as an idea is not only is it free, but it also allows people to engage in a new way. And it does it in a way that's politically and policy neutral. It doesn't suppose that the answer is in this box or this box. It just lets people gather that information and facilitate the conversation. And I think it will also help, the budget writers, the department heads, and our budget managers, and it can help facilitate the conversation. That can only be a good thing.
Well, I think, everything revolves around the taxpayer in a town.
Sure.
That is the central hub of what emanates out from beyond that. You, the taxpayer, is the center of the universe for a town. So that's I think a very interesting concept to use technology in the way that you're using it.
We would be the second town to use this, and I've reached out to the developer, and she's agreed to assist us to make the transition.
So, how familiar are you with the town's budget, and what do you think the fiscal challenges today are?
One of the things that concerns me a lot is the so-called structural deficits. Our town manager over the last few years has been really clear in looking at what she'll call the worst case scenario. But we know that there are some big budget items looming. I'm speaking specifically about pension costs and what are called OPEB or post-employment benefits. And that's not just a Westford problem. This is a problem, it's a Social Security problem for the nation, but throughout Massachusetts, the 351 cities and towns right now collectively owe our public employees $30 billion. That's double the size of the Big Dig budget. Because retirees, like people on Social Security, are living longer. They're living longer, and insurance costs are not going down. Insurance costs have been spiking, and we've had some years of double-digit run-ups. So all of those things, people living longer and the insurance policies costing more and more and more, certainly way above inflation, that is where our big structural imbalance will come from. And there are things, thankfully, that we can do to help in ways that aren't really going to be a detriment to our employees. They are the ones providing the services, being paid for it, but we need them. And in Westford, I've seen our staff go above and beyond the call of duty, certainly beyond what we request or require of them. So there are things that we can do that some will require the legislature to make changes, again, for all cities and towns. In Westford, we did put away a little over $1 million in this budget that we just adopted in a fund to, again, address these costs. So I think we're being thoughtful in that way. Some of those changes that the legislature will need is to, right now someone can be an employee for 10 years and then qualify for that lifetime of benefits. There's a thinking of moving that to 15. Right now you can be a part-time employee, and there's an effort to increase the number of hours beyond being part-time where you qualify. So there are some things like that will help. We'll probably continue to make adjustments to the town employees insurance benefit plan. Right now it seems like a solid plan that addresses both the town's needs and our professionals' needs, but we know that those plans do change over time, so they'll require a lot of monitoring.
Your knowledge seems to go very deep, regarding the state and government in general. Tell us what you do for a living.
Well, thank you. So for about the last 20 years, I've been a legislative director and a chief of staff for 3 different state senators. The first was the chair of the Education Committee, which has the purview over all of the laws affecting our schools. And the next was a senator that was the chair of the Municipalities Committee, which handles all of the laws that deal with cities and towns. She also then became the chair of the Public Health Committee and the Energy Committee. So I was the chief of staff in the Senate for those committees, so I developed a level of expertise in each of those areas. And right now I work for a state senator from Westfield, and we love that I'm from Westford. And he is a Republican, and he's the minority whip in the Senate.
And that's State Senator Donald
Humison.
Humison.
Yeah, and he is one of 4 Senate Republicans. So they will sometimes joke that they all fit in one elevator as their caucus, but they have a great staff, and I really love working with them.
And you were saying that you've written, I said erroneously that you've written bills, and you said, no, I've written laws, and there's a big difference. Can you tell us what that means?
Yep. So anyone, in fact, any citizen can request that a bill be filed, which is a great a tradition, well, not just a tradition, but it's in our Constitution, thanks to John Adams. So a citizen can ask to have a bill filed. And what that means is it gets put on paper, and we'll have a hearing, a public hearing. But that's all that really happens. To get a law passed, it literally has to get adopted by both the House and the Senate and signed by the governor. And that is a very lengthy, deliberative process, and everything has to go right to get a law passed. And I have written and worked on more than 200 items that have become law in terms of budget items and things that led to state regulation. The organ donor law hadn't been updated in 60 years, and one of the last things that I did with Senator Fargo is we changed it. And we've had people in Westford, as you know, children who passed away in accidents, and their organs are in other people right now that are alive. And we know that we can do things that have saved lives. I helped to write the workplace smoking ban bill, which saves about 700 lives every year from secondhand smoke. And we did that in a way that didn't criminalize smokers. Once we had adopted the bill, some people were trying to change the penalty to make smokers under the criminal sanctions of our state law. And my boss did an unusual thing. I advised her, and we voted against our own bill coming out of a conference committee, which has never happened at the State House before. And we knew that would hold it up until the people who were trying to criminalize smokers had to yield. And so that was an interesting issue. But I wrote the legislation that replaced all the bulletproof vests for police officers in the state. A company made defective material and distributed it in the vests anyways. And we found out that at least 50% of those vests were like paper mache. And so I worked on that with the Justice Department and the state at the federal level and the state's Executive Office of Public Safety quietly, because we didn't want anyone to know that these officers were vulnerable.
When did this happen?
This was about 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And we were able to then, I got a list of every city and town and how many defective vests they had, and we tallied it up, and I wrote the legislation that then allowed all of those to be replaced quietly. That's just a few examples. I've written...
Did that ever hit the news?
Afterwards, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We didn't send out any releases to, again, out of respect for the safety job that they have to do.
The police have to do, yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written, here in Westford, we generously use the Community Preservation Act. When that was first adopted, and my boss then was a co-sponsor, everybody was happy. It would allow towns to, buy agriculture so it didn't get developed in recreational fields. But what it didn't allow was a town to use that money on buildings that it already owned. which was odd. So we had communities say, well, we have an old town hall, let's fix it. The law didn't allow it. So we wrote the first reform, and Westford, has consistently been using community preservation money on buildings that we own. So that's another example of.
Let's tell voters what that is. The Community Preservation Act of 2000 was a law that allowed towns to charge, correct me if I'm wrong,
to add a little assessment,
surcharge to the tax bills. And that money was set aside for to be used later, or every year actually, annually, for either historic preservation, land preservation, or affordable housing. And Westford was one of the first to adopt that, that law. And the state at that time was providing 100% matching funds.
And that's the great thing, is the state then becomes a partner with Westford. And the state says, if you value something and you're willing to set some money aside to protect it or enhance it, then we want to assist you. And that's a great example of where Westford can actually reach out with the state and become a partner. One of the other things that I did by way of a law, when the state's economy was going downhill, local aid was being dropped. In other words, towns weren't receiving as much local aid. So the legislature wrote a Municipal Relief Act, and one of the first parts of that was legislation I wrote, which made it easier for cities and towns, especially smaller ones like Westford. Big cities have staff that write grants all the time, not so much in towns. So I made it easier. I required every state agency and department that had a grant to publish it on their website, what the criteria would be, what the deadlines would be, how they would be scored, and who actually got the awards, to make it easier for towns like Westford to apply. I see at my job, at my desk, awards lists of towns that received money for, safety, for fire safety or community policing and the like, libraries, councils on aging grants. And every time I see a list, I'll see towns that didn't apply, even for formula grants that aren't competitive. Somebody dropped the ball. I'm not saying that's happening here in Westford, but as a selectman, most people don't think about these grants, but it's state money. It's real spendable money. And when I was earlier in my career, I put together a master list of all of these grants, which was a lengthy list. There was no list available. I thought, I'll just go get that list. It didn't exist. So I contacted every state agency and department and said, tell me what you have. And I made a big index. And then I was able to notify our towns before the deadlines, 3 months before, because the last thing you want to do is say, hey, fire chief, there's a grant you can apply for, it's called the SAFE grant, to keep kids safe. And, you've got 12 hours to write the grant, and we didn't want to do that. I was able to notify them in advance, and that gave us a chance to let them apply, and then I could follow up and make sure we supported their application. And by that I mean, we would get on the phone, or I would get on the phone and talk to the people who would review, make sure they got the grant application, made sure the town knew when they got the award. So, and we did that in law to make it easier, and Westford has been able to benefit there as well.
Well, let's go into, because you have so much, there's so much in your background that you can talk about, but you have, for selectmen, for your candidacy, you've developed this 5-point plan that you have just given me. And I wanted you to go into it just briefly, if you could just touch on each point very briefly.
And I'll be succinct. So the first one we talked about, and that's the Westford budget box. And this would allow people to interact with the data. Instead of reading spreadsheets, they can really drive into it. Another one is having the Board of Selectmen about twice a year have a public meeting where the citizens of Westford would be welcome to come. There would be one item on the agenda for the selectmen, and that's to listen. This is not just an experiment. The town of Chelmsford has now been doing this for several years, and it's really had a very positive effect.
I just want to understand this. So it would be in addition to a regular selectmen's meeting?
Yep. Okay. So right now, at the start of each selectman meeting, there is a brief period that's open to the public. And sometimes people come, and it's a great way to recognize, if somebody has done a wonderful deed or deserves credit, and I love that. But this would be a meeting that was only open to the public, and the only item is to listen and to engage. And that has really helped in Chelmsford, for instance, to connect people with the selectmen. It has just allowed people to feel more connected. A third thing, this is really critical, is the circuit breaker tax credit. I also helped to write that legislation 15 years ago. This is a state-funded program that gives money to senior citizens, homeowners or renters, and it's based on their income and their housing costs. And we know in Westford that of the 65-year-olds and up, we only have 10% of our population, of our total Westford population. Only 1 out of 10 are these seniors. And that's way below our state average. And the reason I think it's way below is housing costs are so high. So the circuit breaker right now helps about 336 Westford residents get that circuit breaker, which for them, for each, the average is about $870. If somebody didn't know about the program, and that's most people, they can actually go back 3 years worth. It's a one-page form they give to the Department of Revenue, and within about a week, they would get a check. It's not a credit against any taxes they owe. We already know how many Westford seniors don't earn enough income to even require filing a tax form for the state. That's the right person who would qualify for the circuit breaker. So that doesn't count against local aid. That would help our seniors to afford to stay in Westford. And the sort of mini miracle there is seniors use less town resources than anyone else. They use less. In Chelmsford, the Council on Aging Senior Center budget is less than 1%. They have about 23% of their population are seniors, double ours. And their budget for them is less than 1%. So they don't use a lot of, in Chelmsford.
Chelmsford has worked hard to have a lot of housing for their seniors.
Yep. And my wife is the Council on Aging Director in Chelmsford,
Yes.
so she's worked with the housing for elders.
Your wife, why don't we say her name?
Her name is Debbie Siriani, and
Yeah.
formerly Debbie Jewett here in Westford.
Which, well, we'll get to that in a minute,
Sure.
the family connections, but, and I don't want to run out of time. So there are 2 more points on your 5-point
And the other
plan.
2 I'll consolidate. It's essentially regionalizing some of our work. We can communicate with other towns, other boards of selectmen, and we can communicate with other regional public-private partnerships. We have, for instance, the Pan Am problem, where this company just has refused, until very recently, to even communicate with us. But they run through a region, and we can link up with other towns along their corridor and collectively use our voice to communicate our message, which is Pan Am has not been decent to the people who live along that line. They have not been decent, and what they move is dangerous product, and they're very well regulated by the federal government, but they've not been good neighbors. And the neighbors who live along the tracks in Westford are my neighbors. I live just, a baseball toss from the railroad track. I still have
What section
family.
of town are you in?
I live on Graniteville Road. Right around the corner, I lived on Broadway, about 50 steps from the track, where the train idles for up to 48 hours, was just out my backyard. And I still have family that live right along the track. And it's potentially dangerous, and we know that. And that's why those state agencies showed up. So I think Westford can reach out to other communities, other municipal leaders. And the other part, the 5th part, was we should also reach out to other public-private partnerships to attract businesses, to help with the implementation of our master plan that's from 2009. And none of those things cost any money. We can join those coalitions for free. We can do the website for free. We can spread information throughout town to senior citizens for free, and it's state money. We can attract state grants to do our regionalization work. And that's, I think, a solid plan that we can actually do. It's not pie in the sky. And every one of those things has already worked, like the circuit breaker.
In other towns.
In other towns, and yep.
So that brings me to the key question, which is, why do you want to be a selectman in Westford?
Thank you for asking, and it's, I think, a key question on people's minds. I've been involved with the town of Westford since I arrived. When I was, we just mentioned Debbie. We met in college, and this is her hometown. And I fell in love not only with her, but I fell in love with Westford. And her dad and grandfather started the Apple Blossom Festival back in the 1960s. And they of course brought me in, to help. And
well, let's just tell voters that you're helping, but you're more than helping. You're president of the Kiwanis of Westford.
So for the last 8 years, I've been the president of the Westford Kiwanis. We're the sponsors of the Apple Blossom Festival. A lot of people think it's a town parade and festival. It's really a very small collection of dedicated volunteers and citizens. And we attract and welcome all these other nonprofit groups in towns. The schools participate in the parade. Police and fire, the library, they want their trophy back. And the best of Westford shows up for that festival and that parade. And if you're not in it, you're watching it. Mm-hmm. And when people think of the greatness of Westford, they often think of the Apple Blossom. That inspired me to want to be a selectman, realizing that I don't have to just point at problems and say that's broken and that's broken, but I could also point to things that I think are wonderful and make sure that they continue to thrive and that they continue for other generations, for other families.
So tell us about the Jewett Connection in town.
Well, my wife's family has lived in Westford since the 1700s, like since the beginning of Westford. And it's quite remarkable. Her grandmother, Lois Jewett, who lived right across from Healy's Funeral Home, was the house that she was born in. And before there was Healy's Funeral Home, that house was where people were serviced. And she passed away last year after living for 96 years right here in Westford. And her grandmother was a Native American from our area. And so it's the Jewett and the Hall family that have connected. So when I arrived on these shores, they welcomed me and they showed me and shared their stories about Westford, through the wars, the crises that we shared as a country and how Westford responded. We were talking a little while ago about the trolley system in Westford that people might not realize that we've had. It's a truly rich community in the way of history and culture, and any way we can value it and save it and not just preserve that, but to make it a great place, we should do it.
Okay, well, we just have about a minute left, and I wanted to ask you, there are two more questions, so you have to answer them quickly.
Sure.
One is, tell us something about yourself that we wouldn't know, that most people don't know.
Well, most people wouldn't know that I went to a state college, and I studied psychology there at Salem State, but I fell in love with education. Not just my own, because I think I was a middling student, but I fell in love with the whole idea of sharing information and improving people's lives. And that's the experience I had, not just academically, but part of that culture.
All right. Well, I would love to ask you the second question, the second part, but we have run out of time. And so I'm going to end it here, and thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you.
This is Joyce Pellino Crane for the Westford Eagle and WickedLocalWestford.com saying have a wonderful day and vote on May 6th.